afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce to you WIM DEMEY. WIM is one of my esteemed colleagues who is actually has more than 20 years of experience in the field of testing and quality. I know it sounds amazing because if you look at WIM, I think he only left school a few years ago. But he has different experience being a test coordinator, test manager, program manager. And then last year he actually specialized a lot in different tooling topics, amongst which one of them is performance testing, which is actually the topic of his session. So I would suggest everybody to try to stress test WIM at the end of the session with a lot of questions, just to make sure that he's resilient to performance and that he can manage it. So it's all yours, WIM.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, and welcome in this session about performance testing in an Agile context, what is below the iceberg. If we talk about performance testing, we are talking about non-functional testing. And in most projects, that's a tough one to tackle. And if we need to define an approach, it can, like we are looking to an iceberg. Or we just look from far and we see only the top of the iceberg and we think, okay, easy one, no big effort, we will manage that. Or we see it as something massive, huge, having no clue where to start, who needs to be involved, planning-wise, we are a little bit lost. And in both cases, what can happen finally, you hit the iceberg. And the fact that we are struggling with thinking about performance testing, non-functional testing, it's often reflected in your test plans. And do the exercise. Think at your last test plan, test strategy document, and think about the section where you can find something about performance testing. And I bet you will find one of those famous escape keys. You know them, and maybe you're using them. So, help me, TBD, what does it mean? To be defined, yes. Second one, under construction. And last one, SOD, see other document. It are just always to put that question away. It are typical the actions at the end of the meeting that falls off the agenda. Okay, performance testing, next meeting. But guess what? Performance matters. Performance matters, and if you like it or not, it's something in your back, it's something on your shoulder, and you cannot get rid of it. And I think that on the web there are many examples of companies who are suffering or who have suffered big issues with performance. And one thing is crystal clear. If you have issues with performance, it will hurt you. And it will hurt you on one of those aspects. Okay, I hope that I didn't tell anything new so far, because this kind of messages, they are out there for many years. They're out there on each conference, articles and testing, and they are telling the same. However, what makes it difficult to make it tangible? Okay, what does it mean if my performance side is 1 second slower? And to help you, I found an interesting tool. It's a tool of Google. And with a few parameters, you can get at least a first rough estimation about the impact on your revenue. And you can play with this feature to simulate, okay, if my website is 1 second or half of a second slower, what is the potential impact on revenue? Amazon has done this exercise, and they have seen that a drop of 1 second in their website, the Amazon.com site, results in a decrease of 1% of sales. So in fact, it's important to know. And I agree, performance testing, it's difficult. And even if you have done everything, if you have done your homework, everything according to the rules, you can be impacted. And why? We are living in a very interconnected world due to Internet of Things, microservices. So it can be that if I have a fallout of a component in the network, I will be impacted too. The domino effect, that's nothing exclusive for IT. It is valid for other domains. Think at utilities. And it's a hot topic today, the chance on a blackout in Belgium in maybe December, maybe January, February. And in that context, I was reading an article, and it was referring to 2006, where there was a blackout in Europe, and it was caused by an overload on the German network, and within a time span of 17 seconds, the complete European network was down. And the article was saying that if a blackout will happen again in Belgium, it will cost this amount per hour. I was curious, I was thinking 126 million. What can I buy for it? Well, simple. If you want to buy model kits, and it's the 6th of December, I can buy more than 2 million boxes of this nice model kit. So, okay, back to the story. Performance matters, and a recent Gartner report is confirming that statement. And it tells that if you as a company, if you're not embracing performance testing, performance engineering, you will be out. You will lose your market share, you will be ahead of the competition. Back to Agile context. Agile context, to me, as I explained, it's about faster releases, shorten the time to market. So I would think, performance testing, that's an ideal candidate to integrate in my Agile processes. And what do we see in practice? We are not yet there. Something is holding us back, something is blocking us from embracing performance testing like we have done with development, like we have done with analysis testing. That's all embraced in an Agile context, but performance testing, that's difficult. And what are those blocking obstacles below the iceberg? To me, I see three main reasons. First, non-functional requirements. Second, planning. And third, team. Let's dive into. Functional requirement engineering, it's a hard job, for sure. So even if it's already hard to get our functional requirements clear and concrete, what will it be for non-functional requirements? I hope that you agree with me, this example of non-functional requirement is a bad one. If I, as a performance tester, if I need to do performance testing with this requirement, I can continue until the end of my life. What is fast? If they tell me response time is on average 50 seconds, is that good? I don't know. I don't know if I don't have the context. 15 seconds is good if previously my system was taking 1 hour to process everything of information. But if in the previous release my response time was 10 seconds, then I have an issue. Let's refine this non-functional requirement. And now you see you get a lot more information. You get information about the input. Input in terms of concurrent usage. But I'm not only interested in the number of concurrent users, I want to know what is the throughput that those amount of users will generate. Because if I know the throughput, then it tells something about the capacity at server side. What kind of server do I need to process all those throughput? And in terms of response time, you see they are more granular defined. I have seen non-functional requirements telling each business transaction need to respond within 5 seconds. If you don't know the complexity, if you don't know the architecture behind, even it could be that you have a perfect performance configuration and that even 5 seconds is totally not realistic. Example, if I have a web service that is calling an application that on his turn calling other web services, internal, external, yeah, maybe I will strive to obtain something that even is not realistic. And the last one, interesting information, is tell something about the allowed error rate. And why? This information is important for your service management. It will allow you, and I refer to the talk of Eddie Peters, it can help you to define your services and to think about capacity management and so on. Okay, we have now a good non-functional requirement. How do I integrate it in my user story? Example, I just took the search engine of our website. So you see we are still looking for people. And I have a simple user story. And for this user story, I have a non-functional requirement telling, okay, the number of results displayed, telling something about the response time if I have applied filters, and telling something about the concurrent usage. Okay, now I need to integrate both kinds of data. I see different possibilities. First of all, you can just add it as an acceptance criteria to your user story. Just like you have other acceptance criteria, just add it. Performance tests need to be executed. Non-functional requirements need to be met. That's one thing. A little drawback can be that it is harder to get a real idea about the effort spent on performance testing. Then in the Agile world, I was in a very interesting article, and it was saying that performance doesn't add any feature, doesn't add any functionality. So even it's not allowed to talk about user stories with non-functional requirements. So talk about technical user stories. Or I have even seen the term quality story. The drawback can be that you will start doubling the information. You will rewrite your normal user story, adding all the non-functional specs, and you have information on both places. According to the SAFE, they consider non-functional requirements as constraints, and constraints need to have a place in one of your backlogs. And finally, if you have non-functional requirements which are valid for a lot of user stories, features, you can make them part of your definition of DOM. So there are different ways how you can integrate your non-functional requirements into your user stories. And that's in the SAFE model. And you can see there are on different levels in the backlog, there is a reference for non-functional requirements. First message, non-functional requirements, make them concrete, detailed, explicit, and integrate them in your user stories. Planning. Let's take a release. 4 sprints, 3 normal sprints, 1 hardening sprint. Everyone is familiar with the term hardening sprint? Shortly explained, it's a last sprint where everything is brought together and often used as a kind of buffer to solve loose ends. My question for you, in which sprint do you plan performance testing? Let's raise a hand. Who will go for the hardening sprint? No one? Okay. Sprint 1? Sprint 2? Sprint 1, 2, sprint 3? Other opinions? Yeah. Wow. Good. So I can skip all the slides. No, indeed. And luckily there are no people who just say only in the hardening sprint, because that I don't understand. Suddenly we start thinking waterfall. So development, analysis, testing, we will do it in sprint-wise, and then performance testing, no. Keep it for the hardening sprint. Then my question would be, what will you do if during your hardening sprint you encounter a serious performance issue, knowing that normally the next step is shipping to production? And, well, it's not planning, it's not about rolling dice of playing darts. No, it's a structured thing. And first thing is, start small from the left. So even in your first sprint, when you have very small components, you can do already a kind of performance testing. Example, a developer needs to deliver a complex query. There are tools that can assess the response time of that query. If you know that the query takes already 1 second, then you will be sure that here you have a big issue, because I hope that your application is not just using that one query. Then in the next sprints, it's about extending the scope. And so for example, in sprint 2, it can be that I can start combining components. For example, a web service putting a message on a queue, so that I can already test on performance in an isolated way. And so I evolve more and more to more doing performance testing on a system level. And finally, in your hardening sprint, there I would recommend focus on end-to-end performance testing. And that's normally the phase where you plan to do the high volume testing. To me, it doesn't make sense to do a test here with 1,000 users. For your information, most commercial tools, they have this kind of community edition with a free pack of 50 users. And you can do a lot of very interesting things in those sprints. We are doing a project, and with, I thought it was 20 users, we detected already a memory leak. So it was useful to do it very early. Next recommendation, automate. Automate, if you have already a pipeline, well, like it's a good practice to integrate your unit testing, functional testing after a build, you can do the same with your performance testing. There are add-ins for Jenkins, the Bamboos of the world, so it's perfect. It's technically possible. Maybe an exception can be your end-to-end flow performance testing, because that's often a lot more preparation in terms of test data, environments, interfaces. So there it's better to prepare it in parallel, and only when you are able to automate it, then you can integrate it in your pipeline. And last but not least, monitor from the right. And when we did a dry run, we had a discussion about the term, why are you talking about right? Well, if we think about monitoring, we think often, okay, monitoring, that's for the run phase. Monitoring, we will do that once we are in production. I say no. Monitoring should be included during your development. For two main reasons. With a performance testing tool, you will be able to detect or to see that your response times are increasing. But maybe it will be hard to pinpoint the exact component. Is it my firewall? Is it a database? Is it an external component? And with monitoring tools, if your servers are well instrumented, they bring the complete chain in the picture. A second reason, if you integrate your operation peoples, then they know upfront what's coming out our direction. They can make their plans for capacity management and scalability, and they can learn a lot of what you are doing here on the level of performance testing. And one thing to add is performance has an ongoing cost. And that's often forgotten. So sometimes people think, okay, in sprint 1, we will focus on the performance. And what we develop, we will ensure that it is according to the performance requirements. But when you add additional features, then here again, you need to ensure that your performance requirements are still met. So, and that means in terms of planning, you need to foresee in each sprint a kind of, I call it a kind of tax, a kind of fixed user story points to do performance testing in an iterative way. Second message, planning, performance testing need to be planned. And it's not about do it one time. No, it's like you have answered. Do it continuously and use your monitoring tools. Last reason that can block us from embracing performance testing is a team. And here there are several things playing. It's about which stakeholders do we need to involve if we do performance testing? It's about the expertise. It's a misunderstanding, and sometimes we get that question. Okay, I have already a resource that is very capable to automate functional testing. So, per definition, he can make my performance scripts. That's not true, because it's different discipline. It requires other skills. And a question as well is in an agile context, who will do my performance test? If I don't have the expertise in my team, who can do it? Let's first take a look at scoping. And why scoping? Let's take Squad 2. Squad 2 in upcoming sprint, we start next Monday for 2 weeks. They plan to do a performance test on their components in scope, so the yellow blocks. And suddenly they see, I have a connection with another component, typically firewall, Active Directory. Oops, yeah, I need my colleague from the firewall because he needs to open some ports. And maybe you have a connection with components that are hosted externally at a third party. So problem will be that the planning you made, you will not have the support you wanted, because the other squads, they made their own sprint planning and it was not foreseen. Typically that can be tackled in a Scrum of Scrum meeting where you talk about dependencies, or in your PI planning. So to plan upfront, or to think about which kind of performance test do we plan and which kind of support do we need. The stakeholders. I find it strange in Agile, they are only talking about the 3 amigos. For me, I see 4 amigos. Operations. And for the reasons I have explained, operations should be part of the team. Not that they will need to do the performance test, but at least they need to be involved. They can learn from the results. They can help you with monitoring the components. And then the question, how will we tackle, if we don't have the expertise in our team, who will help me with doing performance tests? I see 3 models. First one is what I call the external model, with a center of excellence. I have worked in such a model, and what we did, we got a request of a project, we did a kick-off meeting, we offered a service, and the service was always based on 3 performance runs. 1 in the beginning of the project, in the middle, and at the end. What was the problem? That we were not really working in an agile context because we were doing performance testing for typically a waterfall project as well. So for some projects, 3 runs was okay. For other projects, 3 runs was too less. So, and therefore, I'm a big believer of create a transversal squad, create a specific squad which is fully embedded in the agile working, so with the ceremonies, with the same planning, and they can do performance testing for your other squads. And of course, the ideal world is that each squad has his own capability to do performance testing. It doesn't mean that the tester in your team needs to do then the performance testing. Can be that your developer can take that role. So I see it more as a capability, as a role, instead of saying, okay, it's always the tester who needs to do that. And how can it look? So in such a performance squad, it's more a flexible composition of members. So you have fixed members, like a Scrum Master, APM, if you can see it as a performance engineer. And then you have flex resources. So based on the performance test you plan to do in a sprint, you can ask support from other squads. And at the end of the sprint, those resources can release back to their squads. And on Scrum of Scrum meetings in your PI planning, you think or you try to make a planning, when do you need which resource from which team. Okay, I give you 3 reasons why performance testing is not yet fully embraced or embedded in agile testing. And I think with the information that you have seen, it's not only about performance testing. It's broader than that. It's, in fact, performance engineering. And in the slide with the definition of Gartner, they talk about performance engineering. And performance engineering, you see, and you have seen it in the previous slide, it's a lot more. It's about the different stakeholders, monitoring, optimization, and so on. Is that the final end state? No. And, okay, we have to dream, and we need to dream. I miss still one layer. Because we mostly are focusing on the application part of performance and monitoring. But of course, I have an infrastructure layer. And assume that you are responsible for an application. Tomorrow morning you get a call from infra team, you have a serious issue. One server is down due to a broken cooler. The other server is not rebooting due to problem with the blade. And take the assumption that in terms of cost and time to solve both problems, which one will you tackle as first? Someone an ID? Really? I don't know. I don't know. As long as I don't know which applications, which components are using which server, I can make not a good decision. So, in this example, you can think, okay, the server with the cooler, we will wait till next week, but no, that's the most critical one. And that is that's the final end state. Combining your information from infrastructure monitoring with your application monitoring and performance, and then you have a complete picture. And then you can make very good decisions about, okay, what are the most critical components to do performance testing, to monitor, and in case of issues, which one do we need to solve as first? And bring me to my last slide. I explained to you that performance testing, non-functional testing is looking to an iceberg. It's feeling not comfortable. And especially, how do we need to integrate that in Agile? I give you some ideas. And I think even if you just at least start with one of those activities, you are on the good path. And I'm sure that you definitely can avoid the Titanic scenario. Thank you.